So I do a whole range of things, both in the UK and overseas. I'm working in Russia, helping to set up new schools. I'm working in Central Asia, helping working with universities there to organise their entrance procedures. I've been working in Serbia, training school principals. So a whole range of interesting projects which have spun out of the kind of work that I used to do in the UK. So I became a teacher because I finished a degree in modern languages and thought, well, what do I do next? The obvious thing to do was train to be a teacher. So I kind of got into teaching more or less by accident. But in fact, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And the time that I spent as a teacher was a very fulfilling time indeed in my professional career. I would now. But when I started teaching, I think I found it quite hard to see it as a profession. People said teaching is a profession, but when I put it alongside lawyers, doctors, solicitors and all that stuff, it was hard to really say, well, yes, we'd had the same kind of rigorous training, the same length of training as they had, because actually it wasn't true in those days. These days, it's changed. And that now, I think the teaching profession is much better trained, much better qualified, and much more disciplined than it ever was 30 years ago. And so, yes, now definitely I would say teaching is a profession to be proud of. For me, it was 1 year post-degree, PGCE. But actually the PGCE in those days was mainly university-based. Not as much in school as it is these days, and certainly not as rigorous in terms of the methodology as it is these days. Oh, I loved it. I had a great time. But when I got into the classroom for real, then it was a bit of a shock to the system, I have to say. So I think the situation with teaching has changed dramatically. Teaching used to be a very highly valued profession. It went through a dip because people sort of started to despise teachers, and there was a lot of public criticism, and it wasn't so well paid at one stage. But that's all changed in the last 10 to 15 years. Teaching has become well paid again, and a lot more public respect, even though obviously it's still very much under the spotlight. But I do think that teaching is in a much better place than it was 15 years ago. Well, that sort of thing, looking at other teachers teach, teaching alongside them, learning from colleagues. I think also a good in-service training is to look at yourself through others' eyes. Get yourself videoed, get that feedback and see, okay, what was I doing then? Look at how many of the children in the class you're actually engaging. Which ones are not being engaged and why? And actually learn from that sort of, that's the heart of teaching, and that's what I think you learn from best. Do you know, when you think about your own school days, and I guess everybody does this, you think of who are the characters? Who are the people that really stick out in your mind? And for me, the two that I think had the deepest influence on me was, first of all, a French teacher. I became a French teacher myself. But he was a guy who was actually nearing retirement. But every year he wrote a play in French, and he got us to perform it. And that was the most fantastic start I had. And very much a one-off. Nobody else did it, but he did. And then later on, when I was doing my then O-levels, an English teacher who used to stand at the front of the class and declaim poetry. So we all love poetry. But he used to stand out in the corridor and and nobody misbehaved because there was such a presence about him. And I thought actually at the time, I'd probably still do, he was completely mad, but a really, really impressive teacher and somebody that, kids looked up to. We looked up to him and we thought, this is somebody who takes his teaching seriously. He believes in it. Well, you've got to keep a balance. I think, if all you ever do is teach, then you become stale. So I think, it's very important to have a life outside of teaching to, be able to say, yeah, I do other things as well. Because the children, they're not so much into just being pupils. I mean, they've got lives too. So you've got to have some points of contact. And I think, as a teacher, you've got to keep yourself fresh that way. Take a sense of perspective. It's not the end of the world. And also make sure that you're constantly ringing the changes in terms of what you try in the classroom. There's no harm at all in experimenting a little bit. Try something new. Do something which actually you may not have tried before. Go and look at somebody who you've not observed before. Get some ideas from them. That sort of thing keeps you fresh. Oh yeah, and I remember when I was actually a head of department, and my head teacher was a teacher in my department, which was a kind of bizarre experience. But he had a particular style about him, which I observed a few times. Very kind of quick fire, drilling, and so on. The sort of thing that probably we would look down our nose at these days. But actually, I learnt a huge amount from him from just doing that. Picked up some of those techniques, and actually it revived my lessons. Well, I mean, people complain all the time. It's hard work, all the admin, etc. But actually, you need to put it in a box as far as you can. Say, okay, I've got to do that. It's part of the job. You can't get out of the paperwork. There's a certain minimum you have to do. The accountability goes with the territory. It's now everybody. If you're a good teacher, you really haven't got anything to be afraid of, because everybody is accountable. And then once you've actually overcome that, those two, if you like, psychological barriers, just enjoy it. Enjoy the teaching, because, it's a fantastic job to do. And when you get youngsters who actually suddenly understand something that you've taught them, or suddenly start to produce work that you feel proud of, then, it's the best job in the world. Well, of course, it's becoming a less regulated profession with conditions of service and so on, with academies can be flexible more than they have been in the past. So you have to be quite canny as a teacher in terms of which schools you work for, who you work for, how you do your job. But by and large, the changes, if you like, the organisational changes that the politicians are concerned about really shouldn't affect classroom teachers too much. I mean, you've got a job to do. They're the same kids. It's the same stuff you have to teach them. The techniques are changing and evolving all the time. Keep up with that. But essentially, it's you're a teacher. You're teaching young people. Their future is in your hands. That's always been the case, and it always will be the case. So to that extent, all of the administrative changes, they don't alter the heart of the matter. Well, I guess you come back to, well, why do you go into teaching in the first place? What's the point about teaching? We do get lost, and in terms of some of the root motivation, because you get so bogged down in some of the techniques and what you've got to do and the day to day, and some of the behaviour management, of course, is all can be quite challenging. But it's worth asking yourself the question, from time to time. So why did I become a teacher? What's the purpose of this? Do I really want to, see young people get on? And not just that, what's my role as a teacher in society? I mean, that sounds a bit grandiose, doesn't it? But actually, teachers are the people who introduce young people to thinking for themselves. And if young people never think for themselves, then we're going to have a very poor society in the future. So okay, I don't think it is just a theoretical concept. I think it's really here and now, in the classroom. Get the kids to think for themselves. That's your mission. As soon as they can think for themselves, then they start taking their place as active citizens, and society's in more or less safe hands. Well, the College of Teachers, of course, is going to be centre stage. Well, let's say a Royal College of Teachers. Let's see if we can create a profession which, if you like, self-regulates in the way that, for example, the Royal College of Surgeons or the Royal College of Nursing, the BMA, regulate those professions. So let's see teaching become genuinely a profession which is run by teachers with the highest professional standards and regulated on that basis.